Oh, hey guys. I wanted to let you guys know I am working on a project. It is about two topics. It's going to be a short series of interviews about these topics. The first topic is addiction, and the second one is narcissistic abuse. And these two issues are oftentimes connected and related. So I think that as a society, we don't talk about these things as much as we should, but I think that this is something that it really affects everybody. Every single person out there probably has someone in their family, in their circle of friends, or somebody they work with that has experienced one of these two issues, whether it is addiction or narcissistic abuse or a combination of both. I thought it would be interesting, since you guys have heard kind of like my story with my family. And, well, you haven't heard the whole thing, but you've heard parts of it, and you've heard parts of my personal life when I was younger. Anyways, I thought it would be interesting to interview regular people and get their stories, just people who have stories or experience with addiction and narcissistic abuse, like perhaps in their family, a loved one, or even their own stories about their own lives before they changed it. So I think that it will be very interesting. The first interview I have done is with Deb. Deb is one of our show hosts on Patriot Soapbox. Her show is On a Wing and a Prayer, which is pretty... When you hear her story, you'll understand why she chose that, and it's like the perfect title for her show. So I also just wanted to say, if anybody has any stories about either addiction or narcissistic abuse, please reach out to me and let me know if you want to be part of this project, if you want to do an interview with this, and let me know what you guys think of this. I hope that everybody enjoys it, and I hope that it's something that if it helps one person, then it's totally worth it. Okay, everybody. So you guys have all heard my story about family members that have mental illness and were abusive, specifically narcissistic abuse. And I've talked a little bit about addiction and stuff like that. And so I'm working on a project right now. This is part of that, where we're going to be looking at several different stories of the similar themes, right? Because this is a topic that I think affects everybody. And I think that anybody that's listening to this, if it hasn't personally affected you, you know somebody that this has affected, whether it is addiction or whether it is narcissistic abuse, or mental illness. Somebody in your life that has had to deal with this. And so I think it's very important that we talk about these topics. It's not the people in the past, people didn't talk about mental illness. People didn't talk about addiction. It just was not, it was like frowned upon. And I think it's far more common than people realize. And I want people to feel comfortable telling their stories. So right now I'm interviewing Deb. Deb is a host on Patriot Soapbox with us. And she has experience with narcissistic abuse. So Deb, if you want to just introduce yourself and let us know, who was it that you experienced this? Was it a family member or a friend?
Well, it was actually me. I experienced it myself.
Okay.
I go by Deb65 on Patriot Soapbox. I host on Saturday evenings from 7 to 10 Eastern time. My show is called On a Wing and a Prayer because frankly, we just wing it. And but no, my story goes back to actually the narcissism comes through from drinking, from alcohol addiction. And it was my ex-husband. Yeah.
Wow.
Sometimes I don't even want to claim him as an ex anymore. But yeah, I met him. I actually was going to martial arts class, and I met him through martial arts.
Wow.
And he was 15 years older than I was. And oh, part of it, as I had that cracked mirror. I had low self-esteem, low self-image, and he it started off as like he paid me so much attention. He called me every day. We talked to 2 hours.
Love
I'm surprised.
bombing. Yep.
I mean, I don't know how I didn't get fired from my job, because I was working for the state at the time, and he'd call me at work. We'd be on the phone for 2 hours at work. And so let's see, I met him in 1994. We weren't married, and I got pregnant 1990. No, I take that back. We met in 1993. I got pregnant in 1994. My daughter was born in, I shouldn't say this because it's kind of doxing myself, but 1995. And we got married in 2003. We divorced in 2013. Out of 10 years of being legally divorced, we cohabitated like 18 months. So, and it affected me, it affected my daughter. But I really don't know what to say as far as, I mean, I can give you examples. One of the biggest examples is after we got married, I basically, my family, it was almost like a war between my family and him. I'm trying to be a good wife, trying to support him, but then I have my family sitting there, and they, I basically was cut off from my family. He did such a number on me. One day, there was one day I didn't eat all day. That was my choice. I didn't eat. I wasn't hungry. I'd given him something to eat, and he worked at night. So as he was getting ready to leave for work, I started making a hamburger at 9 o'clock at night. And I made some sort of statement, and you could literally see his countenance change. It was almost like, if you see those the clown faces, where the happy clown and or the mimes that wave their face hands over their face, and you go from happy. It changed. I mean, it literally, you could see the change in him, and he went all off on me. It was, it was like, you're eating at 9 o'clock at night, you're going to get fat, and you don't care about,
Oh my God.
I mean, I'm on the phone after he left crying, and I'm asking, what is so wrong with making a hamburger at 9 o'clock at night? And he knew how important, wearing a wedding ring was to me. And, one time he got mad at me, and he walked out and says, well, since you don't care what you look like, I'm going to take off my wedding ring. And that's the stuff I mean, it escalated. It didn't start off at that, like that, but it escalated. And every time, and before we got married, I mean, deep down, I wanted to break up with him, but I wanted him to be the one to break up. And he would do things like, well, do you want to break up? Do you want to break up? And then, of course, when he would say it, the reality would hit, and I go, no, that's how, not just him, but it messed me up. That's how messed up I was.
Well, I want to stop you right there, because I'm going to make some commentary here. What you brought up about how when you first met, the attention that they give you. This is the first red flag. So for people who are unaware, what these people do, they are like predators. It's almost like they are like they're not like a normal human being, where they're like a predator, right? They have a sense about them where they can tell if somebody is vulnerable. That is who they look for as a target. They look for somebody, like you said, who has sort of low self-esteem or a bad self-image, and that they have a way of identifying people's weaknesses almost immediately. Narcissists are able to sort of size somebody up almost right away, possibly in their first time having a conversation with somebody, they are able to perceive somehow what this person's weaknesses are. And if it's a vulnerable person, what they'll do is they will put on like a false persona. It's like they wear a mask when they're interfacing with the public. So when you first meet these people, oftentimes they come off as charming, smart, funny, confident. Sometimes they come off as like the life of a party or something like that, right? You want to be around them. And when they start showering you with attention and compliments, it makes you feel really special, right? Like, oh, this person really likes me. He's, he really cares about me. He's going out of his way to do these things for me. And that is a very flattering thing. And so what that is, the word for that is called love bombing. And this is how right off the bat, they get you kind of like hooked on their attention, and the way that they're treating you, right? Because for many people, often vulnerable people, this is the first time somebody is giving them that much attention and really making them feel special. And this is all, they do this on purpose. It's all by design, and it's to reel you in and get you emotionally invested in the relationship. And they're on, typically during this phase of the love bombing, they're on their best behavior. They are hiding like who they really are. You know what I mean? Like they put on this show about presenting themselves as somebody that they are not. They're very careful and conscientious about, in the initial phase of the relationship, because they don't want you to see any red flags. They want to get you somehow tied in. And I think that that's basically what you were describing. And like, for example, calling you and talking on the phone for 2 hours while you're at work. That is like, that's such a narcissistic thing to do, right? Or just any kind of abuser. It doesn't have to be a narcissistic abuser, but that's, such a red flag right there. But most people don't know this stuff. They're not educated on what to look for. So it just seems like, oh, this guy really cares about me. He's really interested in me. He cares about what I have to say. He wants to know how my day is going. And it just makes you feel special. Does that sound right?
Yeah, and I'll tell you something else too. Showering you with gifts. What I mean,
Yes.
if you want to start your own business, they're going to, willing to front up the money. I mean, he made pretty good money, and he tells you just enough. Like, I knew he had kids. He was living with somebody. That should have been a red flag, but he convinced me, oh yeah, we're not married, we're just living together. In the course of the state of Texas, there's common law marriage, where you don't have to go through a church or anything. You can go to the courthouse, but they didn't do that. You can sign up. You can, in Texas, you can, as if you come off as being married, you have to have the document to be married. You have to go into the courthouse, sign the certificate saying you're declaring, what is it called? Declaration of informal marriage. And so if you don't have this document in Texas, even if you consider yourself husband and wife for years, if one walks away after 3 years, it's kind of like it never took place. But if you have this document, yeah, I went through all of that with him. I learned a lot of that legal mumbo jumbo, especially after I got pregnant. I shouldn't say legal mumbo and jumbo, but something else is, he wasn't exactly the life of the party. In this case, he wasn't exactly the life of the party, but people liked him. I mean, the sensei of the dojo that I was attending, I mean, they were buddies, and he was part of the what they call the Black Belt Club, and these were given to special people that are supposed to have honor and all sorts of things.
Oh, wow. So that's interesting that he was able to fool this guy. I think that many times when people are in these narcissistically abusive relationships, the narcissist is typically somebody that is, in some cases, like considered pillars of the community, right? Or they're well liked, right? In their field, whatever it is, they're respected. And it's very difficult for people to try to come forward and talk about this, because in many cases people don't believe you, because they see only one side of this person and they have a false perception of who this person is. So that is incredible that, he is, able to fool this sensei of a dojo into thinking he's like a man of honor.
Right. And it just like I said, like I said, it just kind of escalated. And of course, as I got further into it, and I kept playing games with myself, setting goals. Okay, if he did do such and such by such and such time, I'd break up with him. But I couldn't get the courage to break up with him. I mean, he would come and live with me for a while, and I'd find out he was, in his case, he was telling me his mother had been abused by his father, and so he felt like as long as he wasn't physically abusive, there's nothing wrong.
Wow.
He could not see how he couldn't see how he couldn't see emotional abuse. And he actually, when we got married, there was this other girl 20 years younger. I mean, like I said, he's 15 years older than I am, and she was probably about another 7 or 10 years younger than I am. And so he kind of latched onto her, and she was married with a child. And when we got married, she had a miscarriage. And when we got married, he gripes at her husband for not helping her, and yet he neglects me, and I'm having to fix my own plate, not doing the courtesy thing. And I got so upset. We're supposed to be on our honeymoon, and we're over there, and I look back, and I don't like to think about it too much because I get angry, and I don't want to stay angry all the time.
Right.
But I mean, and he was calling her his best friend, and
okay.
and then while I was at work, she was going over, they were visiting each other, and it just got, it was not a good situation. And of course, by this time, my daughter's 8. Our daughter is 8 years old at the time.
Okay. All right. So he needed a new narcissistic supply. That's what it was.
Yeah. Well, and he treated her daughter a lot better than he treated our own daughter. And he, because he was always taking up for this other girl's daughter. He wouldn't support his own daughter. Like I said, he had 5 other kids that I know about, all older than my daughter. And so he had 6 kids with 3 different women.
Wow. Okay. So what this seems like is a pattern of behavior where, the narcissist craves narcissistic supply. And once somebody stops giving them the kind of attention and validation that they are seeking, they will look for narcissistic supply elsewhere. And I think that, what it sounds like is you kind of started to catch on to who he was, right? The kind of person he was. You didn't have the rose-colored glasses on anymore. Now that you've had a child with him, your daughter's 8 years old, you don't see him the same way you did when you first met. So for the narcissist, that is like, it's almost like they can't deal with it. They can't handle it because it's showing them who they really are, and they need to maintain the false perception, the delusions of grandeur, and so they'll seek narcissistic supply elsewhere. And this is also why they have problems ever settling down with one person, because once that person learns who they truly are and stops giving them the validation, the attention, and the supply they need, they have to find new supply, because they certainly aren't going to do self-examination or recognize that they have any kind of problem. And so, from what you've described, it sounds like he just went from one person to the next seeking that narcissistic supply.
Yep. And I mean, he yeah, he even told me, let's see, I think he was about 50 or 55 at the time. And he even flat out told me, he's like, he liked who he was. He wasn't going to change for anybody. And of course,
Oh yeah, they think they're great.
Yeah. Well, and that change is where you mature and brings growth and maturity.
Absolutely.
So he didn't want to change. He didn't think there was anything wrong with him. It was all my fault. Everything was my fault.
Right. Of course. That's
and when
how they are.
And when I tried to break, when the first time that we had a tiff, and I went over to somebody else's house because I couldn't be around him, he was like, well, this couple that he was friends with, he's like, well, they talked me into taking you back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So,
well, and this is the other thing is he I don't know how many times he kept telling me, oh, well, I've got an attorney, we'll just divorce. Well, he never filed for divorce. I was the one that filed for divorce. It wasn't until after my daughter graduated high school that I did, because at the time I ran into someone else and she says, as long as she had kids, you'd have to go to some sort of counseling. And
right.
I didn't have the money. I didn't have the money to do all of that.
It's expensive. Yeah. And the entire family law thing. What a racket.
Yeah. And so as soon as she graduated high school, we had no time. So all I had to do was pay the attorney $1,200 for the filing fees and whatever. And it was probably one of the easiest divorces this person had ever had, because he kept his stuff. I kept my stuff, and we didn't even have to communicate. He was in a different state by that. I mean, in fact, when he finally did retire from where he was working, he worked for the post office. And when he finally retired, and all of his other kids were already aged out as far as child support goes, he actually followed this girl and her husband to a different state. That's where he ended up. And it just, it was such a mess. And I should say what finally I was able to break away. The first time I tried to break away, well, I don't know, as many times as I tried to break away, I can't remember. There was a showdown between him and my family, my mom and dad. My mom and dad came to visit us, and we were in this, I don't know what you call it, a tripleplex or whatever. There was 3 levels. The master bedroom was the top. There was a middle level that was the living area, and then the bottom level had another bedroom. And my daughter was, 8 years old. She's on the bottom level, but while he was working, she was with me on the other levels. Anyway, my mother had got her rabbit ears for the TV. Well, he had taken the rabbit ears and put it up to the master bedroom. So, and my mother got mad, and it became a showdown. My mother was, so I left with, my mom and dad, and we went to my cousin's house, who happened to live in the same town. And while we were there, I called him, and he was like, she's in trouble. I'm like, because she told. I'm like, she didn't do anything. It was not her fault. My mother could hear him yelling. whenever she would be on the phone or whatever, and he was yelling about something, my mom could hear him yelling. So
Wow.
that is, and then of course after, I didn't, for a while there, I didn't talk to him for like 18 months. And then I tried so hard to try to keep things together and, try to get, this is when I got into recovery, because like by this time he was drinking pretty heavily, and I started getting healthier myself, but it just didn't work out. And it got to the point where I've shared this on PSB before, is my daughter and I were homeless. We ended up living in the bedroom of a perfect stranger for about a year, just so I can get, I was working about 3 part-time jobs just to, have food on the table and gas in the car. And because we didn't have really a roof over our heads. I tried the ladies shelter, and I one night, and I really couldn't handle it. And luckily I had someone who could step in, and, but God led us out of that each step of the way. That is probably when, if someone would ask me, you know, yeah, I've been a Christian since I was 8 years old. That's when I was baptized. If someone had asked me, I would have said, yeah, I know who God is. But it was during that time that I really found God, I think. And he just took care of us in such a way, as hard as it was, as, as painful as it was, he took care of us in such a unique, just such a unique, radical way, that I give him glory to getting us out of that situation.
Yeah, from what you've described, here's the other thing. There's a reason that he targeted young women that were many years younger than him. The reason for that is because younger women are not as experienced, and they don't see red flags that an older, more experienced woman would notice right away. So that's why he was going after the younger girl, and why he wanted to go target you specifically, because you were younger than him and you did not know, that you didn't see these red flags that maybe somebody else would have. And obviously your parents saw them. And one of the things that narcissistic abusers do is, when they're in the early stages, right after the love bombing, making you feel special, showering you with gifts, attention, sometimes lavish gifts, right, to get you hooked in. Once they have you hooked, they immediately begin to try to isolate you from all of your family and friends. And it'll start out like, oh, so and so, I don't particularly like her. She kind of gets on my nerves. Things like that, like about your friends. Oh, I don't really like having them over. I just kind of, I don't really like them. I don't like having people over. Can't we just spend time, just us, just the family? And then it becomes, with your parents, your family can see these red flags and are trying to tell you, like, you need to get away from this guy. He's bad news. He's telling you probably things like they don't want you to be happy. They just don't know what they're talking about. Or sometimes they'll use the line like, oh, well, the Bible says that you're supposed to put your marriage first and your husband first. And while the Bible does say that, that does not mean you do that to somebody who is abusive. Your husband is supposed to honor you,
Right.
So, but they'll use these things, anything they can come up with, to try to justify what they're doing. They want to isolate you from everybody because they want you totally dependent on them. And that's exactly what it sounds like he did to you. Made you totally 100% dependent on him and only him, so that you didn't really have a choice to leave.
Well, in my case, because I really didn't have any close friends, so there really wasn't any competition in that while I lived in Austin. But when I actually moved to be with him. That's when we got married. It's like he would he was like, I'm going to move to the coast. I'm going to move to the coast. And finally he did. And that's when it's like moving to the coast. I had to marry the wrong person to realize who the right person would be. And unfortunately, so far the right person hasn't shown up. But yeah, and when I started work, when I worked, I went from working from this with the state with the fire marshal's office to the attorney general's office, and there were women in the office that recognized the personality for what he is. And yeah, he didn't like me. He didn't want me telling tales. He would say, well, you're not telling anybody. And anybody that he knew, yeah, he would tell me about this one girl that he really, really loved. But she didn't, because he wasn't a Christian, she didn't want to have it, she didn't want to date him or anything like that. And the way he talked about her, and it was just, and then when I finally got to talk to her on the phone, it was, he didn't want us to talk because he didn't want us to compare notes.
Yes, exactly. That's right. Yeah.
And with the younger girl, he, the same thing. He didn't want us to compare notes. He didn't tell her that he had how many kids he had with how many women. He didn't tell her that. And she, I told her that, and he got upset with me for telling her that.
Of
It's
course.
like, I'll let her know what I want her to know. It's like, okay.
Yeah. Typical
So,
narcissist.
yeah. So, and then like I said, you add the drinking to it. It gets even worse. And here's something, if anybody out there who's listening, once you make that decision to leave that relationship, don't go back. I can guarantee you all it does is it makes things worse unless he shows a radical change. I mean, he's got to change. Don't go back, because I was fortunate that I didn't, he never hit me. So, but who knows how long it would be before it would have escalated to the point he would have started hitting me or my daughter. Although he sits there, he said he watched his father beat his mother so many times that he would never hit a woman. But
right.
You don't know. You don't know.
No, of course not. And they escalate their behavior. So you can't, you can't trust that or predict anything, because this is, especially if there's drinking involved. And here's the other thing though. People don't recognize like emotional abuse or psychological abuse can be worse than physical abuse, because the psychological abuse the trauma from that can last for years. The scars, the internal scars from that can last for the rest of your life. Physical abuse, while it's painful and it's scary, it heals, right? A bruise heals. But the psychological abuse and what it does to people, how they internalize that, it can be worse than physical abuse. And I think that that's something that is not totally understood in our society, but I think it's starting to be now. People are starting to kind of talk about these things more. People are more aware of psychological abuse and how that can harm people like long term for the rest of their lives. Not only that, but for children of narcissistic parents that grow up in this, they end up in some cases perpetuating the cycle of abuse, or they pick somebody as a partner that is exactly like the abuse that they grew up with, because that's all they know and they think that that's normal.
Yeah, my daughter ended up, she got married at 19. I asked her, I didn't want her to. And yeah, and she ended up, she and her ex, has an ex, and she got pregnant right away after they got married. And, and so she was able, she got her own divorce. she did all the paperwork. She had a friend who was a paralegal who looked over it, but she did her own divorce. So she, in a lot of ways, I think because of what she experienced and what hopefully I was hoping she could break the cycle, but she didn't hang on as long as I did. She got out of it pretty much as quick as she could. Yeah, but it kind of helps when your ex, or in her case, her ex, while she's going to boot camp, he got someone else pregnant. So
Wow.
it helps, I think, that he had someone else and he wanted to marry her. So my daughter was just like, okay, fine, I'm not going to fight for you. So
Right. Yeah, well, another thing that they'll do is when you start to recognize the red flags and you start to think, okay, I've got to get away from this person, they will sometimes promise that they're going to change. They'll make lavish promises. Oh, I'm not going to do this anymore. I promise I'm going to change. And sometimes they will beg and plead and make you feel bad. And then, of course, that's all lies. They never change. It's just to keep you around as the backup of their narcissistic supply,
right.
and yeah.
Well, I was just going to say on that, like I said, in my case, it wasn't so much that he would even promise to change or anything. It's just he would call again, and silly me, I would pick up the phone, or it's like I said before, he was like, well, it won't hurt my feelings if we break up. And somehow that was just a trigger in me, like, oh, well, uh, oh, well, no, I don't want to break up. It was, I guess the guilt is like, oh, do I want to break up?
Trying to make
Well,
you feel like, he's better than you in the relationship, and that, it's not going to hurt him, but it will hurt you, right? Like
right.
you're he's basically doing you a favor by being with you. That's
Well,
the mentality here. Oh, well, it's
well,
not going to hurt me. Mm,
yeah. And of course, I'm like, yeah. And it's kind of like I said, it was a trigger. So well, because I mean, I would try to break things off with him. I'd try to break away. And I even, we lived together, even before we got married. We lived for about a month, and he was doing things, and I just, I basically put his stuff out in front of my uh door, and basically I didn't want him around anymore. And then he would call, or something would trigger something to call, and somehow I would be right back where I started. But it was a hard cycle it was a vicious cycle to get away from.
right. And he probably fed off of those cycles too,
Well, I
of the
did.
whole emotional roller coaster, seeing how far he could push things and then get you to take him back. That for a narcissist, that kind of feeds their ego, you know.
Yeah, and I would even try to go to counseling and try to see what I could do, and I just couldn't do it. And yeah, and it put me in survivor's mode for several years. You're basically, you're trying to, earn a living to put a roof over your head, food on the table, for just to take care of you and your daughter. And I was trying to remember what it was that finally triggered to. There was something that had to do with my daughter that finally triggered me to just finally cut all ties and said, nope, no more. I think it was he left or something. He moved out of town or something. And, there's something now I can't remember what it was that just said, no, I'm no more. Because it was affecting our daughter, and I didn't want her. Like I said, I really wanted her to have a healthier relationship, and cut that cycle off.
Right. Yeah,
So
I mean, it's hard, especially when you have a kid. It's hard to leave somebody. It's hard to start a new
Well, yeah,
life.
and and especially when you have this, well, we talked about, like we talked about before, you grow up in I grew up in an era where, families stayed together. They didn't get married. You got the Norman Rockwell painting of and when you have that idea that you want that family, you want that June Cleaver, Ward Cleaver family picture, that makes it hard when you have children and you want to keep that family unit together.
Yes, exactly. And they know all these things, and they use it to their advantage. And I think it's very sad um that they're able to do this stuff and kind of get away with it. I mean, and what I mean by that is like in the community or in society in general. That's not the case anymore. People are starting to understand that that women can be narcissistic abusers. It's not just men. There are anybody is capable of stuff like that. And so it's terrible and it's destructive for families, these people. And let me ask you something. Did this guy ever once admit that he was doing something wrong and say, I'm going to, I need to change or something like that? Did he ever admit to fault for
Nope.
anything?
Nope. Everything was everybody else's fault. When because we had child support already taken, we already had child support going before we got married. We just kept it going because it was going back to him anyway. And which was good, because when he did finally leave, which still he still broke up or whatever, I was still getting the child support payments.
Okay.
So it was a good thing. And when he retired, he didn't take steps to continue the child support payments. So when I went back to the Attorney General's office to get the child support payments going, he was blaming them for not notifying him that he was supposed to continue. Who does that? I mean, you're paying child support. You would think that he would take the steps to make sure that I was getting child support payments, but he didn't. In fact, he never admitted to doing anything wrong. Like I said, he said he liked who he was. He wasn't going to change. He didn't want to change. In fact, the last time I talked to him, his daughter, our daughter was 14 years old. She's now she's already graduated high school. She's she'll be 20. I think she's going to be 27. I was like, oh my gosh. And I was 14 years old, and he was talking about how he was doing all this traveling and how he wished I was with me. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? I've got a 14-year-old daughter to be raising. I don't have time to be traveling as much as I would like to, but I've got somebody that's dependent on me to support her. And you're talking about doing all this traveling.
It's the narcissist, the ego, the again, that's the sort of the grandeur, the delusions of grandeur, lack of responsibility to anyone or anything, that he gets to go out, he wants to go out and do all these things, he gets to travel and avoid having to take care of his own child. That's you doing that and telling you this stuff in a way like, oh yeah, it's again a form of getting that narcissistic supply without having to really do anything. It's like a vicarious form of it. But that's why he would say stuff like that, and just to see what kind of response he could get. And it's extremely rude.
Oh yeah. And
I mean,
I
wow.
know it just, yeah. And like I said, and as far as I know, none of his kids have anything to do with him, or if they do, they have very little contact with him.
Right. That makes
So,
sense. Yeah,
so I
it,
mean, my daughter doesn't. She doesn't have anything. He finally, when our grandson was born, he actually sent her a package, and my first thought was he probably had some other woman put it together for him. He probably didn't even do it
Right?
himself. I mean, all this time he was telling me, oh yeah, I'm going to send you money and y'all can go travel or do whatever you want to with it. And he never sent me extra money. And it goes back to like, he's sitting there saying, well, I'm going to file for divorce. I'm going to file for divorce. And it was like, well, or I've already talked to an attorney. Well, don't talk, do it. If you're going to do it, do it. Don't
Right.
hang it over my head. I mean, like I said, we did not live in the same town for 8 years. So, we had been totally we were living separate lives for over 8 years before we finally got a divorce. And so I didn't know what he was doing. I really didn't. I got to the point I just didn't care. And I just finally said, I would pray for him and I would pray really hard that he would change. And I finally said, God, if the more I pray for him, the more I'm going to be focusing on what he's doing and not what I'm doing and what I need to do. So I said, Lord, I just can't do it. He's yours. You deal with him what you need to deal with them. Put people around him, do whatever. I can't do this anymore. Just for my own sanity and my own emotional health.
Right. Well, and it's very rare that they do change. I mean, narcissistic people, people that have like narcissistic personality disorder, they don't change. That's not, unless they're forced to go into some kind of like therapy, whether that's a result of going through like the legal system or something, right? Where it's like court mandated and they have to go. But even then, they'll lie to the therapists, and if a psychiatrist or a therapist is not skilled in this, they might, there's no point of them going to therapy if they're not going to be honest. If they're going to lie, then they will get nothing from it. And many times that's what these people do. They lie, they mislead the therapist, or they just don't go in general. And so typically they don't ever change. As you said, he didn't see anything wrong with his behavior. He liked who he was. And I think it's hard for people to accept this, but I think people need to understand there are people who don't have empathy, who are not like you are, right? They don't think the same way. They don't have the same feelings and emotions. And it makes it very easy for them to take advantage of people who do. And obviously this is more pronounced in a psychopath and a primary or secondary psychopath, or they just lack empathy altogether, and in fact sometimes enjoy sadistic behavior and get pleasure from hurting other people. So I think that, that's something that people have to accept, that if you're somebody who is in one of these relationships with somebody like this, you might have to accept that they are not like you. They think differently, they behave differently, and they're motivated by something totally different than what motivates and animates you. And they typically don't change, and they go through their entire life taking advantage of one person after the other, leaving a chaos in their wake. And it's very destructive. But ultimately these people are their own worst enemy, because as they get older, they don't have there's like nothing to show for this except all of the chaos in their wake. And then they end up sort of alone, or else they end up with somebody that is some victim that was not able or strong enough to leave, and they end up sort of abusing that person for the rest of their life.
Right. And one other thing is, if you are in that, and I know what frustrated me is all the people that would support him. That's because they didn't know him.
Enabling.
Yeah, they enabled him, and they didn't know because he was so good at with the persona and the facade. It's not you. It's not about, it's really not about you. It's nothing you could do. You can't change him. You can't rescue him. Don't get that mentality out of your head. And it's not your fault. That's the thing. It's not your fault. And these people just don't know him. You see it. And my suggestion is, find some people who is a good support group. Find you someone who can help you get that emotional support you need, because that's what it's about. It's the emotional support you need to be strong enough to walk away. It's hard when you don't have that support.
That's right.
Find a group. And there are groups out there, and it's like, I can't, I think it was the Boundaries book by Doctors Cloud and Townsend. And think about your love tank. Kind of a love tank. When it's full, that's when you feel good about yourself. But when it's empty, find someone who's going to help bring that love tank, pour into that love tank.
Right. Instead of siphoning constantly everybody's energy
Right.
and emotions, because that's what these people do. They're almost like energy vampires. They feed off of the feelings of other people, and they drain their emotions, their energy, and they also, in some cases, feed off of negative energy. So that's something to keep in mind. And I think that, it's important for people to, if this is not, if you're involved in somebody who is a narcissistic abuser in any way, you have to cut that person off. That is the only way to stop the cycle from repeating, whether that is a parent, whether that is a significant other, whether it is a friend. You have to cut them off because they don't have boundaries and they're not going to change. You cannot change them. What you can do is minimize the damage that they can do to you. And, I've had to do this in my own life. I've had to cut off certain people, and I don't talk to them until they change their behavior. Until that happens, I will not have contact with this person. So it's very difficult and hard to do, but it's also one of the best things you can do for them, because if they care enough, then perhaps they will seek help and try to change. But you can't enable them. I have personally gone through, I have a family member who is a alcoholic, narcissistic abuser, bipolar, and there were people around that constantly enabled this behavior and would constantly bail them out every time their behavior would destroy something, whether it was a job or whatever, and constantly bailing them out and helping them. And that has allowed this person to never have to change, to never have to get therapy, to never get on medication or whatever it is that they need to stop drinking. And so I think that that's not helping them. Enabling them does not help them at all. And you're just allowing them to take advantage of you and to guilt trip you or whatever it is, and they don't have to change. So my best advice for people who have a family member or a friend like this is to immediately cut them off. Let them know what your boundaries are. Tell them, unless you stop drinking, you cannot be part of my life. Until you stop acting this way and doing these things and not respecting my boundaries, you cannot be in my life.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's it. That's as simple as that. And you once you set that boundary and you give them that ultimatum, do not have any contact at all. Don't let them get you on the phone and get you talking. Do not respond to text messages, to voicemails. Don't engage them.
I know in my case, when I went into, I got started, I started healing when I went into Al-Anon, which is the enabler part of an Alcoholics Anonymous.
Hmm.
One of the first things I found out is they said, you don't have to answer the phone every time it rings. And I thought, really?
Yeah.
There are no you have tos. Maybe you should do things that you don't do, or don't do things you should, but you don't have to do. You do what, one of the best questions someone asked me is, what makes you happy? And it'd been so long, no one had ever asked me that question. And when I couldn't answer it because I didn't know. So if you find out what makes you happy, then that is a road to start healing, because then you realize, okay, I don't have to be the one to rescue somebody else out of their situation. All you can do is control you. You can't control other people, other places, or other things.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing is, you can still forgive these people in your heart. You can pray for them. It doesn't mean that you're holding a grudge. You're just maintaining a boundary to keep yourself safe. It's not about like being vindictive or trying to hurt somebody or hurt their feelings. What you're doing is protecting yourself and your children or your family from that behavior. We have 2 minutes left, so do you have anything else you want to add, or anything else you want to leave people with?
No, just, remember to forgive them too. I mean, I used to think, man, I wish he had cancer, because with cancer you could physically cut it out.
Right.
But forgive yourself, forgive the other person, and remember that forgiveness is not about the other person, it's for you, because there's something freeing. And one of the things I used to say is, one of the days that other person's going to have to stand before God, they're going to have to account for what they did, just like you're going to have to account for what you've done, and if you've forgiven them. So, what they say, I mean, I would much rather be judged by God than man. So just kind of keep that in mind.
I think that's great. That's very good advice. All right. Well, thank you for talking to me. Thank you for sharing your story. And I hope that it encourages other people to feel comfortable sharing their stories as well.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity, and I hope I am in agreement. I hope it, like, you don't know how long I've been wanting to get out and tell somebody, and so it's just a blessing for me too. And like you, I hope somebody can find courage to take something away from all this.
Yeah, that's right. And that's one good part of this. That's a silver lining of this, is that you can warn other people, and you can perhaps save other people from going through what you had to go through. And I think that that is very important. And that's why it's important that we talk about this stuff and we don't bury it. And we, validate our own feelings as well.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate the conversation. I hope people enjoy this.
Yep.
All right. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.